My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here at Eola Hills with Steve Anderson, the winemaker, Tom Huggins, founder and general manager. It's August 1st, 2017, and we're at the Legacy Estate Vineyard. And we'll start with a question for both of you. Tom first, which is why wine?
Why wine? Why did I get into this business?
Why did you get into this business?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I used to be an insurance agent 30 some odd years ago, and my specialty in insurance was insuring farms, and I kind of gravitated towards insuring vineyards and wineries. So I insured most of the vineyards and wineries in the state at the time. There was only 30 some, and the one thing I noticed that everybody that was in the business, they all seemed to have such a passion for it, and just a love for what they did. It was almost like more of a way of life than it was a job. And I told a couple of the clients I had, a couple of clients that put in a lot of the vineyards and wineries around here, I said, you know, if you find some land that you think that would grow good grapes, I think I'd be interested myself. And they said, Tom, we're going out to look at a place this afternoon. Why don't you come along with us? And that's that vineyard you passed coming in here. That's Oak Grove Vineyard. So that was what, 32 years ago or something. Yeah. And so eventually I weaned myself out of the insurance business. I probably stayed in the business for 10 years after I started the vineyard and winery. The winery didn't come along until about 5 years later, but that's how I started.
Did you, ask you just a second, I'll ask you the same question, but when you talk about the passion, did you feel the passion before you bought? Like, was it once you bought?
Oh yeah, I mean, when I was an insurance agent, I had a landscaping license, and so I was doing a lot of outdoor work. I loved landscaping, and I looked at, you know, the vineyard, and especially Legacy here, it's just a giant landscaping project, you know. So it's just been a way for me to get out in the dirt, and that's what I really loved. I originally wasn't planning on starting a winery, just growing grapes and selling grapes, but we had trouble selling our grapes, you know, after they matured, and we had, you know, tons and tons of grapes. It was hard to sell them, and then we thought, well, how difficult could it be to make wine? So, and wine we can keep, you know, grapes, when they're ready, you got to pick them.
Sure.
And so there's a limited lifespan of grapes, but not really of wine. So that's why we started a winery about 4 years after we started the vineyard.
All right, what about you? How did you get into the wine industry?
Serendipity. It was not my intention to originally make wine. Started making wine when I was 13 with the neighbor lady's grapes, a 5-gallon bucket, and a story of how her family of European descent used to come together in the fall and make wine, you know, for the family dinner table, and I was fascinated with that story, so I made wine at home for my parents. Really had no intention of making wine to drink myself. It was just a fascination with the project. So graduated high school and totally forgot about winemaking, and have a degree in horticulture from Oregon State. So my intention was to be a nurseryman. I wanted to, you know, grow trees and shrubs and potted plants and sell fertilizers and bug sprays and things like that, and ended up working in the grass seed industry and working in the retail nursery when I got a phone call from the winemaker at Eola Hills, who remembered me when I came to visit doing some wine tasting, who's also an OSU graduate. Tom's an OSU graduate, so there's a lot of us Beavers here. Said, hey, our vineyard manager is leaving, and I remember that you were studying horticulture. Would you care to interview for a vineyard manager position? So I met one of the shareholders who was working at OSU, interviewed with him. He liked me sufficiently enough that he sent me over to the outgoing vineyard manager who was working at HP. So I met at the lobby at HP, and I met Jim Huggins, Tom's younger brother, and he was sufficiently pleased with me, so they sent me up to visit with Tom, and I was hired. And at the time, my wife was like 10 months, or couldn't be 10 months, but she's 8 months pregnant. I had one instead of subtracting one. Yeah, it was a miracle birth. So I said, well, I really need like 2 weeks to get my affairs in order. My wife is, going to have a baby very soon. I need to move the mother-in-law in the house. And so there was this 2-week pause between getting hired and when I was starting. And this was in October, so it was harvest. So Jim was going to train me through harvest, and then he was going to move on back to HP as a full-time permanent job and give up the weekend vineyard management. Well, I showed up 2 weeks later, and I was informed that there was no job for me. Jim and Tom had decided that Jim really didn't want to give up the farming, and so he was to stay on, and they didn't need me. And the winemaker came into the office immediately as I was about ready to leave and asked if I really needed a job, I could come back and work the night shift for harvest as a cellar rat. So that's how I got into winemaking. 3 weeks later, I was approached by the winemaker and asked if I would be his assistant winemaker. So I had knowledge on how not to make wine in 5-gallon buckets, because it's really hard to make a good bucket of wine. So I knew everything not to do, and then with my horticulture science background, small fruit physiology, my mechanical abilities that I had realized during my military experience, I was able to fix things in the middle of the night with springs from like underneath Tom's van seat. We needed a spring for the crusher to keep working, and the only spring I could find was underneath the seat of the van that he had in the office, and repaired the crusher in the middle of the night and kept going. So I was pretty handy, and I've been here ever since.
That's a pretty great origin story. I like that. That's nice.
He left for a while. He left to become a winemaker at another winery.
I did get hired away for 2 harvests.
And then the winemaker that hired him took a job up in Washington, a big winery up in Washington, and so I went back to Steve and coaxed Steve into
come home.
back. That was like 20-some years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned kind of the kismet of finding this site. You just happened to be saying you wanted a site, and you happened to be going and checking it out. So when you saw it, what did you think? What was cool about it?
A lot of it was I was really impressed with this farmer that was selling the property. Mm-hmm. His name was Clarence Primus, and he was probably a 3rd-generation farmer that had his dad before him and his grandfather before him, and he was probably 70 years old. So it'd been in his family for a long time. Maybe he wasn't that old at the time. But I really liked him, and he seemed like a real straight shooter, and he liked his land, but he was consolidating because he was getting older, and none of his kids wanted to follow him in the farming. So one of the things that stuck out, he said, what you'll discover with this land, he said, we're in a shadow of the highest point of the Coast Range. We're in kind of a shadow in this area. This whole area is kind of in a shadow of a high ridge in the Coast Range, and it kind of shunts weather to either side. And he said, we get about 10 inches less rainfall per year than Salem gets. And I said, you're kidding me, it's only 10 miles away. And he said, yeah. He said, you'll see. And it's true. I mean, you can see the storms kind of part. We get rain here, but not like 10 miles to the north or 10 miles to the south of us. So it's a nice piece of land. It had really great soils and good microclimate. And as far as this property, fell in love with this just when I saw the for sale sign go up on it, because it's only like a half a mile from the original vineyard. This is, and I just saw a for sale sign. It was a big timber company had it. And it looked just like, all the property looked just like that over there. And when we got it, it was, what do we have, 400 piles of stumps?
It was covered in stumps, a lot of stumps.
So we chipped we had a chipper come in, chipped the stumps, or a lot of them we shoved into this canyon that you see right behind us. Well, it's not a canyon anymore, but it used to be a canyon through here. And we shoved a lot of the stumps into there, and then put 10 feet of topsoil, a lot of it that we got from this lake and from other points of the property. So we buried it 10 feet of topsoil, and then ran the stream that runs year-round, ran it underneath the vineyard, and then just planted grapes right over the top of it.
Basically created 7 acres of plantable land, because with that gully there, we would have had to cut the vineyard short for the headland for the tractor turnaround, but now we just farm all the way across it. So instead of 3 headlands, there's only 1, and we wouldn't have had access to get to the other side because it would have been too steep.
Yeah.
So by filling in that gully with some of the debris left over from the logging operation and taking soil from cutting the road that goes around, we created 7 acres of plantable land. So
It's all Pinot Noir now.
So you mentioned that you had done insurance for most of the very few wineries and vineyards around, and so I'm curious, when you chose the site, you didn't have many neighbors. How did you go about sort of learning the trade?
Well, the guys that I bought, the guys that took me out to show me the vineyard, the name is Ron Seeley and Vic Winquist, and they were a vineyard development company, and they were my clients. They were guys that I insured, and so I got to know them real well. In fact, that's why I insured a lot of these properties, is because they would develop the property and they'd refer the people to me for insurance. And so they had kind of become friends. And what we did is, I had enough money to make the down payment on the vineyard, but that's it. I didn't have enough money to buy grapes or wire or trellis or anything, and so I sold shares to my bunch of fraternity brothers and my own brothers and sisters, my mom and dad, and I also created a share. We created a share for those guys, Ron and Vic, to give us to consult with us, and that was what they put in. They didn't put any money in; they just put their expertise in. And then after about a year, I'm not sure, maybe a year, we decided that, hey, we don't need them anymore, and so we decided just to do it ourselves. Yeah. And so we bought them out. They're not involved anymore. I don't even know where they are. I know one of them passed away, but I'm not sure what the other one's doing. But anyway, that's how I learned the vineyard. But a lot of it just on the job training. My brother and I, Jim and I, and a couple other people, we pounded all the stakes by hand in the other vineyard. We had a crew. The crew did it on this vineyard. I'm getting too old for that now. But I mean, we did learn by doing. Yeah, all of us. Same with Steve. You know, I mean, he didn't start out. I mean, he made wine in his basement when he was a kid, but it was not like making wine at a 100,000 case winery. He's learned a lot just from doing it. So.
Yeah, tell me about that, Steve. How's it been? And you mentioned before we started talking on camera about all the different kind of soil types and elevations. So how has it been? Tell us like the learning curve for you.
Well, I had a great mentor in the previous winemaker that, gave me a lot of leeway to experiment, and, I asked a lot of questions. I'm quite inquisitive, and I learned quickly. So that was quite beneficial that first couple of years. And as I said, I learned how not to make wine. You have to punch down and mix up the red grapes to get the color out of it. Well, the recipe was just put grapes in a bucket and cover it with a plastic bag and wait 6 weeks. So pretty hands-off. That did not make the best wine. And then, controlling spoilage organisms. That wasn't in the recipe. So it's much easier to make a 6,000-gallon, stainless steel refrigerated tank with yeast and sulfites and, filters and things like that to make wine. So, as Tom said, it was a lot of on-the-job training, and again, because I like to learn, and I'm always reading catalogs, and I'm reading, abstracts and things like that. Remember my soil science from my undergrad. So, knowing the soil types and how they affect, and then early on in the years, in the late 90s, or when I started in 1993, so I guess it was the early through the 90s, there used to be a winemaker group. We used to meet once a month. Back when there was only 77 wineries, you could gather 30 or 40 winemakers somewhere in the Willamette Valley, and we would meet, and we'd say, well, this month we're going to do Pinot Gris. So everyone would bring a bottle of Pinot Gris. It could be any vintage. It could be an experiment. It could be finished, and we'd brown bag it, and we'd all sit around and taste them. And then the fun part came. So, does anybody claim this wine? And a couple of people would raise their hands, and it was none of them. Or maybe one person, oh, that's mine. It's an experiment. And then we would talk about it. Well, when did you pick it? What was the bricks, the pH, the TA? What was special about it? Any problems they had? Or sometimes people would have a real problem wine, and they brought it to get everyone's experience, combined experience. What did I do wrong? I always remember there was always the same winemaker every month. Didn't matter what the wine was, it always had hydrogen sulfide. And he always used Priest de Moose yeast on everything. He loved Priest de Moose yeast, which is known. It's in the literature. Priest de Moose has a high propensity for producing hydrogen sulfide. He loved Priest de Moose. And we, for like years, change your yeast, change your yeast. Eventually he did. And then he stopped asking that question. What did I do wrong? Well, so anyway, so that was real helpful early in the year. Now that there's 700 wineries and 500 winemakers, gathering a group of 40 of them is much more difficult.
It used to be more close-knit than it is now. Everybody's kind of on their own now, it seems like.
Yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit. I'll come back to that a little bit later because I have some questions about that. But I'm curious. What you mentioned some of it. What were some of the other challenges in the beginning? What were the unforeseen obstacles to getting a vineyard and then a winery off the ground?
I think a lot of it was in the early years was just the lack of what I want to say. Oregon was not known. I mean, it was just people were starting to grow grapes here and make wine here, but we weren't known. I mean, we went to California to try to sell our wines, and there were people down there saying, "Are you kidding me?" And
Still say that.
yeah, they still say that. No, it's not quite as bad as it used to be, but Oregon is established itself now, and it took a long time before that happened. They had to win some major competitions against world-renowned wineries, and some of the pioneers did that, and then the people started taking Oregon more seriously, and so most of the wine now in Oregon is exported. We're still, our winery, our model is we sell most of our wine here in Oregon, and but most Oregon wine, I mean, if you look at all the wine that's produced in Oregon, most of it is exported.
Out of state.
Out of state, yeah.
And what about for you? What about the job or what about the industry surprised you in terms of obstacle?
For me, there hasn't been many obstacles from pretty much the inception of Eola Hills. We've been in a growth phase until this year. We've kind of plateaued with this expansive planting that we're sitting in, and plus some of our other holdings. We're able to produce more wine than we've been able to sell historically. And while our sales have gone up, I mean, it's really easy to produce an extra 200 tons of Pinot Noir, but then to go from 200 to 400 tons production and then sell it in the very next year, and that's been our model. We've been able to turn that wine. So this year we're actually taking a little reduction. We're selling fruit, which is a new problem, so that's a challenge. We've been able to pick our fruit, bring it to the winery, turn it over, process those bins, get them back on the truck, they go right to the vineyard. So now to sell fruit, I have to load those bins, haul them to another winery. If they're not able to turn the bins in a short order, then I have to leave the bins overnight, which leaves me short, which is going to be logistics. So that's a new logistic turn for me that we're going to have to figure out if we're going to sell fruit in the future, because we've kept our inventory of picking bins tight. I mean, there's no reason to have 500 bins when you only need 100. But if you're going to sell fruit, you need those bins to leave them somewhere else until the fruit can be processed. So we're working that out. Sure. That's a new hurdle. And our vineyard manager, Jim, is retiring. So I'm taking on some of his responsibilities, his replacement vineyard
really
manager.
Retiring this time.
Really retiring.
Really retiring. Yeah, 23 years later. 24 years later, yeah, he's actually retiring. So, yeah.
So what will that add to your, what responsibilities does that add to you?
Just more phone calls and making sure that the winery that's receiving the fruit is ready to process them, and that we can have the bins back.
More hands-on with the vineyards. Sure. Not just ours, but other people that we buy from. The other thing I mentioned that just the recognition of Oregon has changed things. I mean, if you think about it, we sell a lot more wine now than we did when there was just 30 of our competitors. Mm-hmm. Now there's 700 competitors, yet we sell more wine now, and it's because there's such a demand now for Oregon wine compared to way back when. The other change I think that I've seen over the years is is the weather. The weather has gotten more consistent, warmer, and I don't know if it's global warming, but I mean, we used to have, you know, a couple of really great vintages every 10 years, and now we have a good vintage almost every year. There's very few vintages that aren't good, and it just seems like the fruit we're getting now and the harvest that we're having, the fruit that comes in is way more consistent, riper, less problems to deal with in the vineyard. That's my perception. Yeah. Better weather. Yeah. I don't know if you feel that way, but
well, even if it's not global warming, it's climate change. The climate is changed, at least in the short term. I had mentioned to you early off camera that in coming up on my 24th harvest, so in the 23 that I've done, last year was the first year that I was home for Halloween with the kids. Because normally we're picking into the first week of November. I left for Europe for 2 weeks on October 12th to, you know, just do Europe and scout a trip. Because we were done. Everything was picked. Everything was in tank. The assistant winemaker, my cellar crew could take it from there. You know, I wasn't needed to, you know, make the decisions anymore and on the spot, because everything was tucked away and doing its thing.
And you go back to when we started, and I remember this. We picked one of our stockholders had a vineyard a little ways up the hill here, and we picked his vineyard the morning of the Oregon State football game. That's late November. We picked fruit from his vineyard on the morning of the Oregon State football game. I remember that. And we picked on Thanksgiving, and you know, I mean, you know, now it's really rare if we're picking in November. It's pretty much, and like I say, like Steve said, we practically got done in September last year. So, like a month earlier than it was 25, 30 years ago.
And that's not necessarily a good thing.
Not necessarily.
Tell me why.
Well, I have a different perspective than Tom does. We'll be out, we're tasting the barrels of Pinot Noir, and he's like, wow, this is really great, this is really good. And I'm looking at it more from the technical side. The alcohol is too high and the acid's too low. While it's not bad wine, you know, I'm critiquing it for what it is at the particular moment. So because the fruit came on so early, the sugars rose faster than the flavors did. And sugar is alcohol, not flavor. So I'm sure in many of these interviews you hear hang time, you know, the longer the fruit can hang. And that's why it's great in Oregon that it's a cool climate, or at least it used to be, that it took longer for the sugars to develop. So it allowed the flavors to develop at the same time. So last year, our best site, our Wolf Hill Vineyard 667 clone on RG rootstock, was some of the first fruit we picked in early September, because the sugars were 27 bricks, which means my alcohols are going to be approaching 16, but there was no flavor. So if you go out and you taste those barrels, if you didn't know the history of the wine over the various vintages, you'd taste it today and go, wow, this is really great. But compared to the 15 and the 14 and the 13 and the 11 and on back to 1998, it's really thin and the alcohol's too high and there's not enough acid. So I, as a winemaker, can make adjustments in the tank and the fermenter when we're going, but it's not the same as if it came off the vineyard in a pristine state and the wine made itself.
Sure. Interesting. So on that note, what is unique about Eola Hills wine? What is the unique quality of your wine, or what are you proudest of?
That's a question for Steve.
As you say, that's a question for Tom. What's unique? I make it.
I'll give a quick answer.
Yeah.
You can give a more technical answer, but we like to think of ourselves as making affordable wine for the masses. You know, I mean, I know Steve is very capable. If we wanted to make a $100 bottle of wine, and he could control that, what happened in the vineyard with the grapes that went into that, we could do that, and we do some of that. We do make some wines like that. But for the most part, we're trying to make wines that are affordable for people to drink every day. In fact, that's our tagline on our bottle, everyday extraordinary. We're making wines that are very good quality and affordable that you can drink every day. And to do that, you have to start that process in the vineyard. You know, where our first vineyard, Oak Grove, deeper soils, wants to produce more tonnage than, say, this vineyard. And this vineyard tends to produce higher quality fruit than the Oak Grove naturally would produce, because it's more lower, it's lower soil, a lower elevation, deeper soils, and but enables us to make that $10, $12 wine. You know, whereas if all of our vineyards were like this, we have a very difficult time producing a wine like I just described, affordable, you know, for the everyday consumer. Anyway.
So I don't know if this answers your question directly, but to tie into that, Tom hit on a point that because we're making the everyday extraordinary wine, so we have many vineyard sites, many different clones, so it's a mixture of the wines to make a good quality wine that is in the middle. So in a bad year, you know, we've got some high elevation sites, some low elevation sites, some deep sites. So whether it's warm or cold or just right, our highs and lows tend to be, you know, less extreme. And that was especially true years ago when we didn't have so many of our own acres. We were buying fruit from vineyards in the Umpqua and the Applegate and the Columbia River Valley, some Pinot Noir and some Chardonnay, and that really took out the highs and the lows. So if it was cold and wet in the Willamette Valley, we always got really great fruit from the Umpqua and the Applegate. And if it was cold or they had a frost in the Columbia Valley, you know, that usually meant the summer was going to be good in the Willamette Valley. And so again, we made a good quality, consistent product from year to year. And as our growth has, you know, in sales, we needed more fruit and we had cash available. We invested in ourselves in land. And so this Legacy Estate is the result of that.
And in normal years, the Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris, which are our two main wines, they're in a normal year, the quality is better in the Willamette Valley on those two varieties. But in an abnormal year, it's nice to be able to get fruit from other areas that maybe are a little warmer than our area. And then, of course, we make a lot of different varieties of wine, and a lot of varieties don't grow well in the Willamette Valley, but they grow really well in Applegate or Umpqua or Columbia, Walla Walla area, you know. And you know, our philosophy is to start with the best grapes. You know, a lot of wineries tout themselves as estate. You know, you hear that word all the time, estate. Well, I mean, you know, we could make wine from our estate here, but all the grapes are from here. And you're pretty reliant on the weather being good, the soils being right. I mean, everything has to be right. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And it's not always best for every variety. Maybe good for Pinot Noir, but maybe a good Pinot Noir year is a bad Chardonnay year at this spot. But whereas we get fruit, we like Chardonnay from other areas, so we buy Chardonnay from other places. And it's a lot of it is a matter of where you get the fruit. Steve's a great winemaker. He can make good wine as long as he's got good fruit. He can make really great wine. But you know, you can't make great Syrah from Willamette Valley.
I say it's always easy to make bad wine from good grapes. You know, that's really easy. You know, making good wine consistently, you have to start with good grapes, and I mean that's a universal truth there. Everyone will say that. You know, you got to have good grapes. It starts in the vineyard, and that's true.
Having said that, though, I always feel like, I mean, I don't like to have bad years, you know, challenging, tough years. But in the tough years, the good winemakers stand out, because a lot of people can make fairly decent wines in a really good year. You know, they got good grapes. It's hard to screw it up, you know. But in a challenging year, where you got really challenges with the weather, or with a frost, or a late freeze, or whatever, you know, the good winemakers really kind of rise to the top. And so a lot of times I feel like our wines stand out more in the bad years, because we make pretty good wines in the bad years, and a lot of them don't. And whereas in the good years, like I say, everybody makes pretty good wines. I don't like to have bad years, though.
Well,
Who does?
well, so that's an interesting philosophy of kind of covering all your bases by getting your fruit from a variety of places. And like you said, how did you come about that? How long did it take you to get to that realization of many sources for good fruit?
I don't know. You know, so many people. It's I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of stubborn. So many people talk about estate, and it's like it really bugs me because you can't always make the best wines from your own fruit. You can make better wines by getting good fruit from this area, good fruit from this area. You know, it's the same way with barrels, where Steve experiments with different yeasts in different barrels. If we used grape from all one place, we had all the same kind of barrels, all the same kind of yeast, you know, your wines would probably not be as complex and as they would be more boring than if you have a lot of different variety. Literally, I mean, we have 3,000 barrels in our winery, and literally none of those barrels are exactly like, because we get different vineyards, different yeast, different barrels from different areas, and also different age barrels and different toast levels on the barrels. And I just like the variety you get. And it's the same in the vineyard. You know, you get grapes from different places, and you're going to have more variety and you're going to have more choices than if you're just reliant on one source.
So I kind of bridge both worlds here. As the founder, general manager, in charge of, you know, has to market all this wine and sell it. I mean, that's a good viewpoint to have. But again, you know, I have some pride in my product, and he said, you know, yeah, I could make the $200 bottles of Pinot Noir from select, you know, individual sites and things like that. But the world over talks about terroir, you know, it's the place. So, I mean, looking at the vineyard behind you, I know that the fruit from that particular block is different than that block, and that one over there. They each have their own unique character. And so that's where the estate comes in. You know, if you have an estate and you've put in the effort, you know, I only want this kind of soil type, with this, you know, elevation, et cetera, you know, you're really trying to define the sense of place, the terroir, and use that as a marketing tool. And, you know, we do that with some of our fruit. We make special barrel select reserves and vineyard reserves as well. But the majority of it is, you know, the blend, the cuvee from all the various sites to make an everyday wine that, you know, because my philosophy is similar to what Tom had said earlier. You know, I would rather make wine that people are going to be able to drink every day and enjoy, rather than wish they could, you know, have a bottle of wine and drink, you know, $300 bottle or a $15 bottle. So I bridge both of the worlds there. I'm trying to make the $100 bottle, but realize that I have to make a $15 bottle. So that affects my yeast choices, the barrel choices, how long we age things in barrels, you know, how many times we rack the wine, all those daily, weekly, monthly, annual, you know, and even 4 or 5 years in the future when we're planting vines, you know, what am I going to do with that fruit in 5 years once it, you know, becomes harvested? I have to plan. Do I have space in the winery? Do I need another tank? Do I need a bigger bottling line? You know, more warehouse space. All of that are things that I'm thinking about, you know, even as he's talking, I'm already thinking, okay, you know, all right, tomorrow we're filtering, I ordered more glass. I mean, so for me, winemaking is a lot about logistics, risk management, continuing education. I mean, it's just a never-ending job. You know, I go to sleep at night thinking about tomorrow and next week, and oh, I forgot to do that yesterday, kind of thing.
And I go to sleep at night figuring out how to sell it all.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a second. What is your sales or business philosophy when it comes to selling wine?
Again, I mean, we're focused on Northwest. We're focused on particularly Oregon. We're one of the largest. If you just look at sales in Oregon, we're one of the largest, maybe second largest or something in Pinot Noir. But you know, it's very expensive to market your wines out of state, especially when you're the size we are and you're trying to sell, you know, your $10 to $15 range. You know, if we were producing 5,000 cases instead of 75,000 or 80,000 cases, and we were selling wines for $50 a bottle instead of $15 a bottle, yeah, you can afford to go out and sell them anywhere. But you know, again, our margins on our wine are a lot smaller than most wineries, and so, you know, we're looking at you know, we think of every different possible way you could sell the wine. I mean,
As I said, we've been in growth for 30 years.
Yeah.
And so now we're taking a breath, we're pausing, we're reevaluating, do we want to continue to produce 100,000 cases of wine, or do we want to scale it back to 50 or 70, sell all the wine, tick up our price, raise our margin? I mean, this is just universal business questions. It doesn't matter if it's toilet paper. To use a Costco thing, toilet paper and wine, it's a commodity. So we can make 50,000, run out, so we raise our price to smooth things out, or we make more wine and keep
a lot of
our
it, I
price.
think, isn't even necessarily raising the price. It's maybe selling, having a different demographic of how you're selling your wine. Like when you sell your wine through a 3-tier distribution system, by the time you pay, the distributor takes his cut and the retailer takes his cut, and the marketing cost of selling it through that system, you're not making very much money. Whereas we're developing a piece of property like this, and we want to put a neat winery up on the hill and a bed and breakfast over there. We've got event sites for weddings and reunions and concerts.
It's more direct to consumer.
More direct to consumer type sales, and so we're really not selling our wines for any more money. We're just not. We're cutting out all the, the 3 tiers. We don't really want to do that either, because that's what makes our name. But we don't want to rely on that. Sure. We'd rather. We'd rather sell as much as we can direct through our retail operation. Steve's sister-in-law came up with the idea of this eclipse that we're having here in 3 weeks. We made a special label for the eclipse, and I think we shipped out 2,000 cases of it yesterday. And it's the same wine as our Pinot Noir, but it's got the eclipse on it, and boom, 2,000 cases. So a lot of it is marketing, so anyway.
Well, while we're on the topic of philosophies, and we've talked a little bit about this already, but I'm curious about your sort of winemaking philosophy and how you've developed it over the years.
Yeah, that caught me off guard. I was thinking about something else.
Always catch the winemaker.
Winemaking philosophy. Well, I mentioned, I want to make wine that people can enjoy every day. So one, it's got to be, it's got to be fruity. It's got to be clean. It can't have any, overt flaws to it. And again, that all starts in the vineyard. And up until recently, I've had Jim, Tom's brother, as our vineyard manager, who is really particular. I mean, super, super critical of himself and provides me with the best fruit. So it's really been hands-off as far as my input in the vineyard. He comes and he talks to me and says, what do you think we need to be thinning, or, timing of leaf pulling, or, various sprays. But pretty much the fruit comes to me in a clean, perfect state with no leaves, no rot. Up until recently, most of our fruit's been hand-picked. And so one of our efficiencies is that we haven't had the need for a sorting table, because the fruit comes to us clean. And plus to do 1,500 tons of fruit and hand sort it all before it goes into the crusher would be a monumental task. So it would have to be an automated operation. But we've had really good clean fruit, and I expect with Antonio, his replacement, who's been with him for 15 years, it's going to be the same. But I'm taking more active role in the vineyard. I've been walking the vineyards and finding things and having conversations with Antonio, and so that's changed. So my philosophy is pretty much what I've just said before: to make a good, clean, consistent, quality fruit that people can enjoy, not wish they can enjoy.
Yeah, we want our consumer to be the person that goes to the supermarket or comes to the winery and buys a bottle of wine to go home and have with just a regular, normal dinner, instead of the person that comes there and says, it's our anniversary, let's get a bottle of Eola Hills, or it's our birthday, so it's got to be every day.
One of the things that really pleases me is when I hear a comment from someone. It's like, well, I tried XYZ brand or ABC brand, and you know what? You just can't beat Eola Hills. And they come back and they had to learn their lesson. Not to say that there's not a bunch of other great wine out there. I know there is. I enjoy wine made by others as well, but I like it when people say, you know what? I tried someone else, but I came back to you. So
there are a lot of wineries that are small. And when you're small, you can sell wine for just about whatever you want to sell it for. As you get bigger, you got to the other factors.
Feed the machine.
And was that a conscious choice? You said, I'm talking about 30 years of growth. Did you set out to grow big?
No, not necessarily. We want to be. We're more interested in being good than being big. I don't care if I don't think we're ever going to be the biggest Oregon winery. We're big in Oregon because we focus on Oregon. We have a lot of loyal customers in Oregon, but there's other wineries that sell a lot more wine than we do out of state. A lot more that we are actually bigger than here. I mean, I tell people, this winery is a lot bigger than us. They are, because they think, we're big because we sell so much here. But, I don't really foresee changing that much. I mean, it's not we're going to ever turn away opportunities out of state or China or Europe or whatever. But this is our base. I mean, practically all of our stockholders are Oregonians. And this is where we want to be, always. This is our priority. With this vineyard, my vision for this vineyard is we're going to be busy here selling a lot of wine because we're going to have a lot of concerts, a lot of weddings. We're going to have a lot of functions here for people to come here, and that's my philosophy. More direct-to-consumer type stuff. That's how you get loyal customers, really. I mean, you go to the supermarket now. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of choices. How are they going to choose you? I mean, you got to have a good label, yes, but you mostly got to have other reasons for them to look for you. I mean, you got to, do a Sunday brunch or have a concert, or we do a lot of trips. I mean, we do a lot of things to create our customer base. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a real loyal customer base because of that. So they actually look for our wines because you can't find them if you aren't looking for them. The stores, there's so many wines to choose from now. So many. Not just Oregon, but Australia, Europe, California. Just a lot of choices for people.
I don't know if this applies or not, and it's 2 decades old now, but I came in the transition in the wine industry when, back in '93, there still used to be what was called a brand set. You could go to the retail, go to Albertson, Fred Meyer, Safeway, and you could find Eola Hills Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Gris, and they were all together as a brand. And so, Eola Hills with 5 or 7 varieties of wine, you had a whole section of a shelf.
You could find it.
And it was easy to find. Oh, I'm looking for the Eola Hills. Oh, I've loved their Pinot. Why don't I try their Chardonnay? So that worked out great. And then I don't know what happened. Somebody had the bright idea. Well, let's put all the Pinot Noirs together. Let's put all the Chardonnays together. I know the answer to it. There's a big winery in California who helps control the market and distribution. Had the great idea. And so our one Chardonnay got buried in the sea of the 52 other Chardonnays from the big winery in California that has all these other brands. And
think about it, the big wineries were losing market share because of all these different brands coming in, and this was their way of fighting that trend of losing market share.
And that stuck, and that's the way it continues to be. So now you go and you go to the wall of Chardonnay and the wall of Pinot Noir.
I did a tasting at Redmond, Fred Meyer last year. I don't remember how, but they had 450 Chardonnays. 450
faces of Chardonnay. Yeah.
I mean, if you're a consumer, you go in there. I mean,
the wall.
How do you?
The Great Wall of Chardonnay.
That's just Chardonnay.
Right.
And they had more Pinots and more Cabs. They had 450 Chardonnays. Anyway, tough. It's tough to compete in that. So you've got to do things again to create your customer.
So the growing of the grapes, it's easy. The making of the wine, it's easy. Relatively, the selling of the wine has become increasingly difficult.
Yeah, that's the hard part. That's her job right there.
So, what accomplishment are you proudest of here at Eola Hills? What is it you look back on and say, I'm really proud of this?
I'm proud of this guy.
I was just thinking that. I hope he mentions me, because there's many things. I mean,
Yeah.
just starting, planting grapes in 1982 when there was practically no acreage.
I mean, people look at us as one of the old guys now, and I never look at myself that way. But when I go out to tastings now, and I don't recognize anybody there, I see maybe a Doyle Hinman or somebody that's been around as long as I have, and I think, wow, look at there's so many new people. I mean, every time I go to a tasting in Oregon, even in Oregon, there's wineries from Oregon that I had never heard of. So
Who is that?
It's just
Where is that made?
yeah. Who are they? Where'd they come from? But anyway, no. It's the thing I'm probably most proud of is that we've survived this long. And I used to work for my dad, and when he retired, he came to work for me, and he used to brag to everybody, my son used to work for me, now I work for him. And I've got 2 of my kids active in the business, and I'm real proud of that. I've had all my kids have done things over the years at the winery. And, I remember when Kylie was about 10 years old, she was doing all the labeling, all the labels. All those crooked labels, no.
Yeah.
No, but Kylie and her sisters used to label all of our wine by hand. And anyway, and her older sister she's a designer, a graphic artist now. She's done a lot of work for us, graphic work for us. So I'm just happy that we've got a lot of long-term employees. I really I've been blessed to work with my brother for all these years. We've got guys in the vineyard that have worked there for 20 years. And so, I take a lot of pride in the fact Steve's been over 20 years, and his assistant, I think, has been here 20 years.
15.
15?
It's going on 17, I think, actually.
But I mean, having people that work here for a long time, that means a lot to me. I mean, I've been blessed to have so many great employees that have stayed here for such a long period of time.
And I'd like to rephrase the question, and rather than what am I most proud of, more of some of the highlights, I guess. So June of last year, we bottled a project that I started 20 years ago when I was the assistant winemaker. In 1996, I had recently discovered port. So I went to the winemaker and I said, can I make some port? I would like to make some port. And he didn't like to tell me no, kind of thing. But he thought about it. He says, "Oh yeah, well let's consider it." And so that year in October '96, we had gotten some Cabernet Sauvignon and took 1 ton. So at the time we had a bunch of 1.5 ton fermenters. So we took 2 bins of fruit, crushed it, and let me make some port. We didn't let Tom know that we were doing that.
Didn't even tell me.
So the idea was that I wanted to eventually build an inventory and blend a tawny port together, like a 10 or 20 year tawny port. So we were going to do this every year and build an inventory. Well, I had, in 1998, had left, got hired to be the head winemaker at a winery in Southern Oregon. And so those barrels, when I came back in January of 2000, were still there. And one of the first things I did was to go taste all the wines and barrels and tank and find out where they were after harvest, and to make sure everything was okay. And I'd come across these barrels that had a port that had been in there for 4 years, and I said, wow, this is really good. So I was excited, and I went upstairs and I handed some to Tom, and he always goes, what is it? And I never tell him because I don't want to bias. I said, just smell it, taste it, and tell me what you think. Oh, well, this was really great. And I go, well, this is Cabernet Sauvignon port from 1996. And he goes, this is like 4 years old. And the wheels were turning, and so if I'm in his head and speaking, he's like, we're not making any money on this. We're not selling this. It's just sitting in inventory doing nothing. We need to be selling it. And I was like, it still has 16 more years to go, I'm thinking inside my head. So the compromise was to take half of the volume. I had 4 barrels. So we took 2 barrels, we bottled it as a late bottle vintage port, and put it in a half-size bottle, and we're selling it for $30 a bottle in the tasting room, and it sold out in about 7 months. Oh, we're out of wine. We need more wine. And go, well, it hasn't been 4 years for the next vintage, the 97, which was also still hiding out in the winery. So that started our port in 2000, bottling up late bottle vintage port. And so we went from 4 barrels to now I'm making 16 barrels of port each year. And we're still bottling half or 3/4 of it. And in 1996, we started that project. June of last year, I bottled the last barrel of 96 as a Colheita. So that 1 barrel of port had been sitting there for 19 years and 8 months. So it's a 20-year tawny port, but a single barrel, so it's in Portuguese tradition a Colheita. So that's a highlight. And I've always wanted to make sparkling wine. I wanted to make sparkling wine back as an assistant winemaker too. Well, we took a wine trip. We do European trips, travel with Eola Hills, and we take people to Europe. And one of our trips, as a pre-trip, we took a group to Epernay in Champagne area, and Tom's wife Debbie's like, "Oh, I really love Champagne. This is so great." And she asked Tom, "You think Steve can make this?" And I heard her say that, and I was just waiting for it. And Tom looks at me and says, "Think you can make this?" And I go, "Yes, please, 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 please. I've only been asking to do this for a long time." So he says, "Yeah, go ahead." So as soon as we got back, I'm talking to Jim, say I'd like some Chardonnay from this block of the vineyard and this block of the vineyard. Don't thin it, don't do this. We're going to pick it at this bricks. And so we have made some sparkling wine, some Pinot Noir Rosé and Chardonnay. So
That's really good.
last year, so it's 2016. It's in Entourage at the moment, so we have the backup following that. And I think Kylie, our sales manager, has been shopping it around, and we've got a retailer who's interested in it, and they think they can move like 500 cases of it a year. So we're going to put it into distribution here hopefully this year.
That's really cool. Describe a port story. I haven't heard one quite like that before. That's a pretty awesome story.
When he started, a little add on to that is when he bottled some in 97 or
2000 from the
2000
1996.
from the 96 vintage, but it was 96 port. Left most of it, or half of it in the barrel, the half of it bottled. Somebody came to the winery. It was Jack. Came to the winery earlier this year, and he had a bottle of the 96 port.
The original LBV.
Back in 2000. And then we had the 96 Colheita that was in barrel for 20 years. So we had the two to try side by side. It was pretty interesting. They were both really good. But it was really, really interesting to see how wine aged in the
barrel
bottle
versus under glass.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we talked about this a little bit earlier, and you've already given some answer to this, but I'm curious, in addition to just pure size, what are some of the other changes in the industry you've seen? I mean, you've seen pretty much the whole industry grow up in your time here, and you've seen a big chunk of it too, Steve. So what are the biggest changes, in addition to just purely growth, that you've noticed in the industry?
Well, and Oregon's on the map now. I mean, people know about Oregon, even in Europe and China and every place else. Oregon's not a secret anymore, or it's not a local phenomenon. It's a world-renowned place to grow grapes, and that's what's made it possible for 700 wineries to be here instead of 30 or 40. But that's probably been the biggest change. I don't know, does that answer your question? Yeah, that's been the biggest thing. I think it's only going to get more,
Well, it already has.
Tourism.
I mean, we have
tourists are coming here. A lot of the reason I think the eclipse is a big deal, but a lot of them it's wine related. I mean, a lot of vineyards and wineries are having big eclipse events, and
that's going to massively. I mean, we're supposed to have 1 million plus people arrive in Oregon. We're going to have 960 people here for the weekend. We have concerts each night. So that's 960 people. We have a contingent from California, from a big corporation down there, have hired several buses, and they have a spot designated for themselves. We have a contingent that's coming over from China, a group of 50 people, and they're all going to drink wine. They're going to remember Eola Hills. They're going to remember Willamette Valley, Oregon, and they're going to take that home and hopefully, ask for Oregon Pinot Noir, and hopefully Eola Hills Pinot Noir as well. But like Tom said, there's many wineries that are doing that. My wife works at another winery in the tasting room, and they're doing an event in their vineyard and a breakfast just the day of the event. So that's large.
They're doing an event over in Madras. It's pale. I mean, what we're doing pales in comparison with what they're doing over there. They're expecting hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, it's a 500-acre ranch, and it's just going to be a big party for the Eclipse.
Amazing.
So it changes
We're featuring our Eclipse wine.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Changes that I've seen. For me, it's more of the frog in the pot kind of thing. I agree with Tom that Oregon has become even more recognized the world over, and people are coming here from around the world to make wine. I mean, there's new investors from France that are buying vineyard properties, investing in wineries, buying wineries. Kendall Jackson, even Gallo is now up here planting grapes, 1,000-acre parcels of grapes. And while some people are afraid of that, I look at it as an opportunity for us to help ride on their marketing dollars. So if Kendall Jackson is going to make, 1 million cases of Oregon Pinot Noir, they're going to have to sell it somewhere. And they're going to promote Oregon Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, and that's just going to help us sell more wine.
They're running into more and more problems, I think, too. In California, the drought situation down there has been tough, and I think they see the land prices up here being way more affordable than what they can do down there, and our weather is more predictable. And I think that's another reason why they're moving north.
Well, you started to say this earlier, but I'm curious, in addition to what you've seen change, what do you see in the future? What does the next 10, 20 years of Oregon wine look like?
I'll be retired by then, so I don't know.
Well, I just went, Scott Burns, geologist, PhD, or Portland State University. Yeah, I just went to his little seminar last night, and people were asking some questions. So then I asked a leading question, and the question was, what do you see in Oregon in the next 5 to 10 years? And so I asked the question about north-facing slopes. So in the Willamette Valley, we tend to plant on south, either east or west-facing slopes, depending on if you want the morning sun or afternoon sun, but they all face south to get the more sun. Well, if you believe in climate change and it's getting warmer and drier, I know in the Umpqua Valley, Pinot Noir is planted on more north-facing slopes. In some cases, there's a lot of benchland down there too, but if you want to plant a cool climate grape, and you're planting on a south-facing slope in a warm climate like the Umpqua, it doesn't produce the best fruit. So you can produce on a north-facing slope. When I see just our surrounding property, there's a lot of north-facing slopes here coming off the Eola Hills that could easily be turned into vineyards if the climate continues to change and get warmer. So we could easily, triple the grape production in the next 10 to 15 years here in the Eola Hills.
Plants on north slope now because it's the traditional south slope, but
yeah,
there's a lot of great. Our best wine consistently is planted on north slope, and it's because it ripens a little behind.
It's the soil, the rootstock, and the clone too.
Yeah,
and the crop load really has a.
Maybe it'd be better if it was on the south slope, but it is on the north slope. We don't have much north slope here. I mean, most of it is kind of south and west, but it just depends on what you're planting too. So if you look at things that ripen a month earlier than other things, then you could plant them on different slopes and have them more. They ripen more uniformly.
What about the size of the industry? How big is it going to get?
It doesn't show too much signs of slowing down right now. It just, I keep thinking, that it's going to, but I don't know. Steve and I just got back from France. We were over there on some business, and when you go to some of their bottling lines and you see about a couple thousand bottles a minute coming out of there.
Yeah.
And you think, who's going to drink all this wine?
Well, we were in the Languedoc, and we visited
Unbelievable.
a factory. Let's just call it. It's a bottling facility, and tanker trucks roll in, from cooperatives or private wineries, and they just go to a central bottling location. There was one bottling line that had 90 filler heads. And that thing went around in less, well, like 15 seconds. It did one revolution. So 90 bottles. And out in the parking lot, I was looking at the stacks and I was counting them, and I went, okay, Tom, from here, not everything over there, but just from here out to there, that is 1 million bottles. That's our 1 year's production. That was a 2 days bottling run for this facility.
Yeah.
You know, it takes me 7 months to do a bottle, 1 million bottles with my 16 head filler.
And you know, it hasn't, you know, the consumption and the wine, it's not here like it is in Europe. I mean, you go to, you're walking down the street in Paris or any place there, and at lunch, I mean, everybody's got a bottle of wine on their table at lunch, and that has not hit here. But if it ever did hit here, we need to plant more grapes.
Well, everyone's talking about China, but what's flying under the radar too is India. The wine consumption in India has increased quite tremendously. The issues there are the climate for finished bottled wine and storage and not having it go bad. So you think of Madeira and port and India Pale Ale. You know, there's things you got to do to the wine or the beer to make them last in India, and I don't know if those are going to happen here, and I'm kind of digressing, but you asked, you know, what's the potential for growth if those markets eventually open up? I mean, the per capita consumption in China is going up. So if you got 1 billion people, and if you go up 1/4%, I mean, that could suck up all of our production and everyone else's in Oregon.
There's only so
just
many
that,
places
you know,
around the world that have the climates to grow good grapes. I mean, they have a lot of vineyards in a lot of places, but they're not, you know, maybe they don't produce as high quality fruit as others do. So there's a finite amount of places to really produce really premium wines, but there's more and more and more people being added to the consumer base all the time, and the people that are becoming attuned and educated to wine increasing all the time. So I think we're not going to be taking any grapes out of production anytime soon.
yeah.
So what about more specifically, what is the future for Eola Hills?
For me, again, I'm kind of at the end of my career. I plan on working a few more years maybe, and then passing the reins over maybe this guy and the next generation. But my goal is to see this project here finished. That's my goal. I mean, I'd like to get the vineyards finished and get our facilities done out here. We don't have any really facilities. We're starting to do things out here, but we could do a lot more if we had the facilities out here. The winery, the bed and breakfast, the event facility. So that's my goal over the next few years.
For me, I'd like to see us plateau at a certain level of production, and then really focus on our marketing, our price point, and figure out ways to, as we've done in the past, continue to turn over product, and then be able to get to a point where, like, you know, we're running out of wine. So then we can either produce more or, you know, play more with the pricing and our margin, and some of that ties in with the direct-to-consumer. So development of this property, making a destination where people will come to and then have a great experience with Eola Hills, Willamette Valley, Oregon, and ask for our wine. You know, and then spread that word. Oh, I visited this great place in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. It's Pinot Noir at Eola Hills, and hopefully they'll start asking for it. And so either we raise our prices or we continue to grow and make more wine. But I think we need to take that pause and, you know, critique where we are. We've been growing for 30 years, so let's tweak it, make it profitable for everyone.
So the last actual question I have for each of you, and I'm interested in both of your answers to this, is what advice would you give someone today who wanted to join the wine industry?
Be prepared to work a lot, and just know that weekends are usually your busiest time. A lot of times evenings. So it better be a passion and something that you like as a lifestyle. It's a lot of work, but it's a rewarding work. And there's so many people that like the thought of living on a vineyard or looking at the grapes, but if they want to make money at it, they need to be all in.
Yeah, growing grapes, to go back to the first phase of it, you have to grow the grapes if that's your thing, if you're not just a winery. And I always tell people, expect to never take a vacation except, maybe in January, because you have to be here to do the pruning and then the stuffing in the canes, and then you got to spray every week or every other week all through, and then there's harvest, and then after harvest there's the cleanup. So pretty much your only month off is the month of January. You're busy 11 months of the year growing your grapes, unless you have a lot of money and you can pay for people to
yeah, a lot of people, some people in the industry
to farm
have
that,
a lot of money.
to farm for you. So that's phase one, and then to go right back into what Tom says, it's for me, winemaking. People, oh, how is it? And I go, well, it's a hobby. I just happen to get paid to do it. And if I can learn how to get paid to go fishing, but not have to take other people with me, that would be great. No, it's a hobby, it's a way of life. And like Tom says, weekends. We were here on Sunday, emergency rush bottling or labeling some wine for an order that was to go out. Harvest, it's 7 days a week, 16 hours plus a day for the 6 weeks, making it happen. So, yeah.
It's a way of life.
It's a way of life.
You know what? We've gotten pretty good here, though, at incorporating fun things into our way of life. Steve and I host a trip every year to Europe. Last year, we take 90 people?
96 people.
Some people to
for 3
Croatia.
weeks to Croatia and northern Italy.
Countries. And it's business, but it's kind of like a fun break from what we normally do. We do a lot of concerts, and we do bike rides.
So it's like I get paid to go on a European vacation and take 50 or 90 of my friends with me.
But we've learned to try to incorporate fun things into our business. So, I think that's been what's kind of kept us.
Well, it shows, like you said, with the longevity of your workers here, it definitely shows that you're doing something right. So.
Either that or they can't find other jobs.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to mention? Anything I forgot to ask that I should have? Any final thoughts? Either of you?
Just need to have people drink more Eola Hills wine, that's all.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate your time and answering our questions.